Did you read the last story? This issue is even more exciting. Welcome to subscribe. Chapter 6. The Scarlet Rat Swarm in the Sewer. Before the Full Moon. Paris Drainage System. On November 17, 1897, 2 days had passed since the theft at the City Hall. The mist of Paris seeped into the cracks of the flagstones in the back street of Notre Dame. When Isabella followed Adrian into the drainage opening, a stench of decay mixed with the smell of rust assailed their nostrils. The damp stone walls were covered with fluorescent moss, bearing a striking resemblance to the patterns of the first-generation prince's blood spreading in the underground palace mural. Fluorescent blood in the darkness. The cast iron ladder beneath Adrian let out a creak as if struggling under his weight. The chain of his silver pocket watch hung down into the shadows, and the North Star chart on the dial was directed towards the depths of the tunnel. From there came a series of intense scratching sounds, like countless joints knocking on the damp stone walls. Isabella's birthmark suddenly grew hot. By the light of a match, she saw several dead rats floating in the accumulated water of the drainage channel. Their eyes were a crystallized silver blue, and a strange red glow seeped through the fur on their bellies. "Their blood is glowing," Adrian said as he drew his silver dagger. The unengraved part of the handle reflected his tense jawline. "It's the same symptom as when the opera singer mutated, but this time it's a mass infection." In the instant before the match went out, Isabella saw the rose-shaped patterns identical to her birthmark, swirling in the pupils of the rat swarm, as if living virus beacons had been implanted. Suddenly, a deafening crash of an iron railing collapsing came from the corner of the tunnel. Hundreds of rats surged forward like a black tide, their eyes scarlet like molten gold. The fluorescent blood beneath their bellies traced out a double helix pattern in the darkness. Adrian pushed Isabella behind the stone wall, and with a swift motion, his silver dagger sliced through the air, creating a cross of silver light. The leading rat let out a high-pitched shriek the moment it made contact with the silver weapon, and the fluorescent blood beneath its fur exploded into blue sparks. 2. The rat swarm halts where the blood drops. "They're tracking your blood." Adrian's dagger slit the throat of the second rat. The fluorescent blue blood splashed onto the stone wall, forming a red circle mark identical to the one on the City Hall list. As Isabella stepped back, she missed a step and fell into a sewage pool up to her waist. The putrid water filled her boots. When she placed her palm on the pool wall, all the rats suddenly froze. Their scarlet pupils reflected the wound on her wrist, and the blood was seeping into the pool water at a visible rate. Time seemed to stand still. The rats crouched on their front paws, their bodies bent in a gesture of worship. The rats in the front row even used their tails to draw rose-shaped patterns on the muddy ground. Isabella's birthmark glowed faintly underwater, and the fluorescent blood actually avoided her skin, forming a protective circle on the water surface. Adrian's voice boomed in her ear. "They consider you as the host of the virus. Or rather, their sovereign." 3. The principle of silverware and the first mention of the night demon breed. The moment the silver dagger split the third rat, Adrian grabbed her wrist and pulled her onto the stone steps. The water droplets dripping from her wet skirt splashed blue light on the ground. This was the resonance frequency between the virus gene and stigmata silver. "The vibration frequency of stigmata silver can disrupt the virus protein structure," he said as he tore a strip of cloth from his cuff to bandage her wound. As his fingertips brushed against the back of her hand, the rose-shaped pattern of her birthmark flickered in the dim light. "But it's ineffective against the night demon breed that retains its sanity. Like those talkative infected people in the City Hall." Isabella remembered the word Arctic, shouted by the City Hall guard before his death. She suddenly noticed that on the stone wall where the rat swarm had gathered, 1918 and the Arctic coordinates were engraved. The font was so fresh that it seemed as if it had just been scratched out with claws. Adrian's pocket watch cover clicked open, and the North Star chart inside coincided precisely with the stone-engraved coordinates. On the edge of the cover, she caught a glimpse of a tiny line of engraved words. "Charlotte, forgive me for forging this knife with your ashes." 4. The embodiment of virus characteristics. The rat swarm suddenly let out a shrill scream. This time, they bypassed the silver dagger and charged straight towards Isabella's ankles. Adrian's dagger grazed her hair, but the moment her blood splashed out, all the rats stiffened simultaneously. Her blood dripped onto the stone bricks, causing a virus-themed relief from 100 years ago to materialize. During the 1462 Holy War, the blood of the first-generation prince merged into the Arctic ice layer. In the cracks of the ice layer, the blood of the 7 holy maidens was forming a symbiotic double helix with the virus. Their nervous systems have been taken over by the virus. Adrian's voice trembled. A rare occurrence. He drew a rose-shaped pattern on the ground with his silver dagger, forcing the rat swarm back into the corner. The Dracula faction is trying to mass-produce controllable blood, plague breeds, cultivating the virus consciousness with human fear, just like when they secretly hoarded the blood in the reliquary back then. Isabella stared at the fluorescent blood beneath the bellies of the rats and suddenly saw memory fragments of these tiny creatures. In the iron cage of an underground casino, a blood race member in a white coat inserted a test tube into their bodies. The label on the test tube read LW1897, the same as the number on the hunter leader's badge. When she hugged her trembling shoulders, she noticed that the fluorescent blood was moving towards her, like migratory birds returning to their nests. V. The correspondence between the stone wall inscriptions and the pocket watch pattern. Look here. Adrian used his dagger to pry open the stone bricks where the rat swarm had gathered, revealing deeper inscriptions. The Holy War scene of 1462 overlapped with the sewers of modern Paris. The phantom of the first-generation prince was injecting blood into the sewer, and at his fingertips, the outlines of 7 reliquaries perfectly matched the number of petals of Isabella's birthmark. The seal of the Arctic ice layer is loosening, he said, pressing her cold wrist. These rats are searching for new hosts for the virus. Suddenly, a rat dropped from the overhead pipe. Isabella instinctively sidestepped, and her silver dagger sliced an arc in the moonlight. This was the first time she had attacked on her own initiative, but the blade stopped just before touching the rat. Adrian's pupils constricted sharply. You can anticipate their movements? She stared at the fluorescent blood beneath the rat's belly. The flowing light spots took the form of the star chart from the underground palace mural on her retina, and the Arctic coordinates flickered with the heartbeat of the rat swarm. Vi. Adrian's abnormality and the virus's worship. They're worshipping you. Adrian suddenly turned his back, his voice muffled in his scarf. Just like the blood-colored phantom in front of the sarcophagus in the underground palace, just like the word vessel shouted by the infected in the city hall. Your blood is not a contaminant to the virus. It's a return. His silver dagger hung by his side, and the unengraved part of the handle reflected Isabella's reflection. The rose-shaped birthmark on her right shoulder was glowing, as if infused with liquid moonlight. The rat swarm began to rub their heads against the soles of her boots. The fluorescent blood formed the initials LW on the ground. Isabella recognized it as the initials of Leonardo Dracula's surname, the same as the number on the City Hall hunter's badge. When she crouched down, a baby rat actually placed its front paws in her palm, and the rose-shaped pattern in its pupils perfectly coincided with her birthmark, as if making some silent oath. 7. Details of silverware forging and memory fragments. Adrian suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her into a narrow side passage. The inscriptions on the stone wall became increasingly dense. Besides 1918 and the Arctic coordinates, there were repeated Scarlet and V, the initials of her mother's name. In the winter of 1895, he said, staring at the inscriptions, his Adam's apple bobbing. The night before Scarlet was injected with the first-generation blood, she engraved these coordinates in the laboratory. She knew that the Dracula faction intended to create virus weapons, and your father... He suddenly fell silent as the sound of metal friction came from the distance. Isabella's birthmark suddenly burned. The fluorescent blood of those rats connected into a line in the dark, pointing towards a bronze door deep in the tunnel. The door was engraved with the same rose-shaped pattern as the Notre Dame underground palace, and the blood-colored liquid seeping through the door crack was exactly the same red circle color she had seen on the City Hall less 3 days ago. 8. The first perception of the virus network. They're constructing a virus network, Adrian said, pressing his silver dagger against the bronze door. The handle resonated with the rose-shaped pattern on the door. Every infected person is a node, and you are the core. Isabella suddenly felt a splitting headache. Blood-colored light spots appeared on her retina, representing the underground of Paris. Each light spot was converging towards her position. These were the Type B blood people marked by the virus, the red-circled ones on the blood tax list held captive by the Dracula faction. The rat swarm started gnawing at the bronze door. The fluorescent blood corroded a double helix pattern on the door. Isabella's blood dripped onto the doorknob, and her rose-shaped birthmark suddenly emitted a strong light. The sound of flowing water came from behind the door, mixed with the faint call of the first-generation prince. "My vessel, come and see the truth that your father tried to prevent back then." ... 9. Adrian's concealment and the symbol system. Adrian suddenly blocked the door with his body, his silver dagger held across his chest. "Don't go in. That's the virus cultivation chamber of the Dracula faction." But the chain of his pocket watch was trembling, and the Arctic coordinates on the inside of the cover coincided with the double helix pattern on the door. Isabella noticed the burn mark on his cuff, in the same position where she had been burned by the infected person's blood in the opera house. She suddenly remembered the old photo in the hidden compartment of the pharmacy. Her father stood in front of the icebreaker, and Adrian was holding an unfinished dagger of the same style as this one. "You've known all along that my blood can activate the virus," she said, staring into his evasive eyes. "Since the opera singer mutated, since you put away your notebook when you saw I wasn't infected, you've been waiting for me to trigger these marks." The fluorescent blood of the rat swarm formed an arrow at her feet, pointing towards the darkness behind the door. And her birthmark was resonating with the rose-shaped pattern on the door, fitting as perfectly as a key in a lock. X. The collective freeze of the scarlet rat swarm and the convergence of foreshadowing. Adrian's silver dagger clattered to the ground. He had never been so flustered. "Your father injected the purification blood of the Holy Maiden into you, and my silverware contains Charlotte's ashes... We wanted you to be the balance of the virus, not the vessel of the first generation." But Isabella's fingertips had already touched the bronze door. The moment her blood seeped into the pattern, all the rats simultaneously looked up, and their scarlet pupils reflected the blood-colored phantom emerging behind her. It was the first-generation prince in the sarcophagus of the underground palace. At the winter solstice in 1918, the silver moon curse will reach its peak, Adrian said as he picked up the dagger. The unengraved pattern on the handle suddenly revealed a rose-shaped outline, exactly the same as Isabella's birthmark. These inscriptions, these rats, and the list in the city hall are all coordinates for the virus to spread. And your blood is the key to activate them. The bronze door collapsed under the gnawing of the rat swarm. A fetid wind blew out, carrying blood-colored liquid, which formed the same Arctic coordinates as those on the inside of Adrian's pocket watch on the ground. Isabella looked at the flickering fluorescence in the depths and suddenly realized that those Type B blood people held captive, the rats injected with the virus, and even her own birthmark were all pawns in the first-generation prince's century-long plan. And now, the rose-shaped mark in the center of the chessboard was glowing, waiting for her to make the crucial move. This issue ends here. The next issue will be even more exciting. Subscribe as soon as possible.